I'm Prue and this is Kat. We're from Hassell, and we're talking about the Melbourne Design Wall for Melbourne Now. So this project was a kind of design collaboration between Hassell and NGV. It was a slightly different way to how NGV usually engage designers for exhibitions, as we both sort of deliberately set out at the beginning to learn from each other's design processes. So we worked across both organisations as one team throughout the whole kind of design and delivery. So we sat in each other's offices for days and worked. The NGV came along and were embedded in all of our internal design review processes. And similarly, we attended all of their kind of delivery design meetings. So that was sort of one of the key objectives of us coming together to do this project. And it was a really positive experience. It was really transparent. It was really open. Realised that we both had working with similar concerns, but obviously come at it from slightly different starting positions. So to that end, I guess NGV was both our client and collaborator, but the client for Design Wall was probably a little bit broader than that, in that it was a free exhibition as part of Melbourne Now. So we sort of had the City of Melbourne as a sort of a bigger client, plus the 35 sort of design studios, brands and manufacturers who were displayed on Design Wall. They were both client and the hero for Design Wall. A key part of the brief also for us was that it was to be used for secondary and tertiary sort of educational purposes, sort of tool to communicate potential and opportunities for good sort of product and industrial design. So when NGV came to us, the first one up there is Design Wall back in 2013. That was the first iteration of that. So this was sort of an evolution of that first Design Wall back in 2013. Simone Liamon was the curator, and she came to us with the 30 different objects that we had to display. All of them come from Melbourne design studios, brands and manufacturers. There's those, when you can, at a glance, you can see some of them are just sort of in our everyday lives, the rakes, the secateurs, hoses. Some solve really kind of important sort of health problems. Some push boundaries. Some are sort of mass produced en masse, and some are just produced in sort of smaller sets. So what we kind of took from this very early on was the stories of, we won't go into all of them, but there are some extraordinary stories that sit behind some of these objects, and for some of them they're sort of a people's life work. So taking some of those, the cricket ball, and putting it into the NGV. I think the owner cried when she heard that the cricket ball might possibly be in the NGV. Couldn't believe it.
The pink one?
The pink one.
Right.
Yeah, and the white one.
Right.
That's got a beautiful story behind it, but if we've got time we can go into some of them. So the first thing was, understanding the mass or the quantities that we had available, and then there was sort of object arrangement and how we could sort of start to build some of the narratives through placement of objects near each other. So these were the two key kind of design ideas and concepts. Because of those stories and how people had worked so hard to get these things into market, we were really interested in spectacle, the wow moment as you walked in, displaying mass-produced products en masse, but also the discovery and how we could draw people in to discover the detail in the stories. The other one was designing for disassemble. This was a really kind of key one as well, and good designing for no waste. We were really interested in how this might inform all the sort of material and design decisions that we made along the way. So these are from our bluescape. This is actually how we worked with NGV. We had a shared bluescape and we popped stuff up and scribbled over it. But we landed on a galvanised scaffold really, really early in the process. Because it was a system that was already in production, we could give it back after we used it. It allowed us to kind of build this sort of repeated framework and backdrop. It could cope with the scale that we wanted. It was a 7-metre high gallery, so we wanted to make this thing really, really tall. It was also sort of provided a bit of a nod to the warehouse in which most of these things were stored until they made it to the shelves, a bit of a nod to Bunnings. And it mostly it offered these lovely views through which we thought was kind of key to inviting people in to discover. You can start. You can
yeah, so it was important to us that it was always translated that this was a wall, first and foremost. So we sort of had these three sort of key testing moments where we placed the scaffold up against the wall. We then pulled it into the middle of the gallery space, and then that led to us looking at this sort of third option where we kind of split it apart and you are then able to actually walk through the wall itself. And in terms of the actual location of the wall, then we identified that there's three main entry points into the gallery space, and it was important for us that from each point of entry that you could sort of understand the scale and the layering that was involved in the wall and the scaffold itself. And we really wanted to draw people in to have this sort of moment of discovery, and then also realise that once you actually approach the wall that there's these different moments that you can walk through it. So pattern making became very sort of apparent to us as we started to work into the scaffold system itself, and obviously the object quantities. And by splitting the wall in half, it kind of gave us 4 elevation points instead of this singular one. And then we also sort of led way to giving each object its own bay, and that also meant that every object could be viewed at whatever eye level you were approaching it from.
I think that was a really important thing for this sort of evolution of design wall. I think the first one was sort of really experienced elevationally, and a lot of products were sort of up 5-6 metres in the air, and you sort of viewed them from on the ground. So by splitting a wall in two and working with the scaffold frame, it gave us 32 bays, I think, or 36 bays to work with, which meant in having those 4 elevations and giving each product its own bay, regardless of whether it filled that bay or not. We were sort of quite rigorous with that. You notice like the motorcycle, I mean, there was only one of him, and he was pretty heavy, you couldn't probably put him up high, but it did mean that then not only could every object be viewed at different eye heights, but it also meant that we had the opportunity to kind of shift and move objects around so that you could view them from behind or underneath. Or part of something that was really nice that came from working with the NGV as well was this sort of opportunity to kind of prototype really quickly and at sort of one-to-one. Edward Lineker, he was one of the designers who was chosen to be and display on Design Wall. That was a really nice opportunity because we wanted him to kind of make the 2 arches and the illuminated arches at both ends. So we worked with him quite closely. He actually made the lights for Design Wall explicitly, but they have since found new homes in other projects. So we worked with him through that. Also then working with the NGV in terms of the ply, we left all the ply raw. We left it as full-sized sheets, and we looked again at a really simple clip fixing that we could screw at the back.
Finish this next slide.
Oh, cool. All right. So afterwards we could unscrew it, and the ply was also given to a local cabinet maker so they could reuse it. And then I think we're almost at the end. I'll quickly tell you this story because it's our favourite. These masks were designed by a guy who was previously an anaesthetist, and he had come, unfortunately, almost lost a child because he couldn't tell if the child was getting oxygen after surgery. So he spent 8 years developing that little red thing inside the mask. So after surgery, you can see it moves up and down. So at a glance, you can see and make sure that someone's getting oxygen. And so this was just all the allowing people to kind of view things up close and little bits and pieces. So,
Thank you.